Welcome back, everyone, to session 2 with Dennis Duff. In the first session, we talked about how Dennis became a devotee of Adi Da, and we ended with Adi Da going to India in 1973, and a question that Dennis had for Adi Da before he went on that trip. And Dennis, if you could just say remind us what you asked Adi Da before he went on that trip, and then we can start talking about what happened after he came back.
Okay, well, there was it was a small gathering. There was a small group of devotees back then. There was only about 40 of us. And on the Prasad day, we used to have these special days once a month where we would sit with him in the morning in meditation. And then in the afternoon, we would go to a devotee's house in Los Angeles and have a meal. And then afterwards, Adi Da would either, talk to us, give us a communication he wanted to give to us, or he would accept questions. And so this was the last Prasad day before he was going to go back to India. And I asked him, I said, well, I thought that your sadhana was complete. Why are you going back to India? And he said, I'm going back for the sake of my work. I'm going back to purify anything that's in the way of me being able to fully communicate the process without any limitations or obstructions. And so that was very educational for me. And we had a small little building. It was really an office, that it was our meditation hall, and another office next door that was used for our courses. And just before he left, well, actually, he decided we should move out of Los Angeles, and he wanted to move into a more rural area. And we actually looked at a time to relocate to Santa Barbara. And then that kind of fell through. And then shortly before he left, we acquired another office building to rent. It was upstairs and had a lot of space in it. And so when he left, he said, okay, well, now you have your work cut out for you. This is what you're gonna get this place ready for my return. And so that's what we did while he was away. He was away for, I think it was about 3 weeks or a month. And in the middle of his trip, while he was away, he sent us a communication. And prior to going to India, he used his birth name, Franklin Jones. And we always referred to him as Franklin or Franklin. Yeah, Franklin. And when he was in India, he said that he was changing his name to Baba Frijan. And this was going to reflect a change in the way he was going to work with everybody. And he said he took on the name Baba because that was a name that he was called by his father in his childhood. And he said you can translate that into brother. And his father was from the South, and that's kind of a Southern name, Baba. And then Frijan, he said, is a translation of Franklin, which means free man, and Jones, which comes from John. So he said he's coming back as Baba Frijan. And so he returned. We all went to the airport, and when he arrived back, and it was obviously a very joyous occasion. We hadn't seen him in about a month, and he seemed particularly happy and free. And so anyway, that actually started a big transformation in his work. And he entered into relationship with every devotee very personally. He became our friend, he became our intimate. It wasn't a relationship in which there was this distance from any of us. It wasn't And so it altered everything, and it was a dramatic shift, actually. And some of us, particularly me, had a hard time with it initially, because he just acted like a free being right in front of us in all his forms and expression. And I could tell you about early on, and we started partying, actually. This was a big shift too, because prior to that, we had very strict conditions from the moment you woke up in the morning until you went to bed at night. And it was kind of a grind, and you were really up against your resistance in the midst of all these demands. And all of a sudden, he shifted everything. And I can remember one day he was in the meditation hall, and he was sitting in his chair where he would normally sit in meditation with us. And he was eating a sloppy Joe sandwich. And, there was this store, a restaurant, I don't know if you know, called a restaurant, but it was this burger stand outside of our offices on La Brea Ashram. And it smelled, I mean, they must have had a fan or something they'd blow out into the street. And every time you'd go by, you smell this. And from a perspective of somebody who's really into health food and everything, it just felt like, oh my God, that food is going to kill you if you eat it. And so anyway, he was sitting in his chair eating this. And I remember looking at him and thinking, oh my God, he's going to get really sick. And he started saying, okay, well, we need to have, bring over some beer and start drinking. And I remember I was really offended by this. And he just became really free, and he was dealing with people,
Why were you offended by it?
Well, because I had this vision of what spiritual life was, which was all about this purity of purpose and self-discipline and renunciation. And, that's just the way I viewed it. And I think I might have told you, maybe I didn't, I can't remember, but, he told me that I was meditating too much.
Yeah.
And so that was, I was into yoga and meditation and super strict diet. And, I've been doing this for a number of years. And so my idea of spiritual life was this ascetic process, very Eastern oriented, denial, giving up this and that. And so, this was offensive to me. And now all of a sudden he's drinking and he started smoking. And I remember one of the first nights that he started doing this, and my wife went home early to, relieve the babysitter. And I said, okay, I'll be home shortly. And about 2 hours later, she called the ashram. She said, where are you? And I said, well, I said, I'm having really mixed feelings about all this. I said, there's a part of me that's really in resistance and reaction to what he's doing, but there's a part of me that is almost delighting in it. And I'm laughing and I'm seeing his humor. But then, I'd be offended when he'd be criticizing people. And so I had all these mixed emotions. And so finally I did go home that night, and the next night we got a communication, a phone tree, that he was going to give a talk at the ashram. And in my naivete, I thought he was going to apologize. I thought he was going to say I went too far. And actually he gave
That's not what he said.
That's not what he said. He actually gave a wonderful talk called The Three Dharmas. And I know, no, that was the following night. It was called The Guru is Prophet. And the Guru as Prophet was a communication about how the divine Guru must be free to do anything necessary to break up the patterns in his devotees and show them that all of their, seeking is absolutely futile. And that was, it was a liberating talk for me. And then I realized that that's what he was going to do now. He was going to get down and he was going to deal with our unconsciousness and bring it to the surface and all our reactions, fears, presumptions, and he was going to, deal with those. And he started doing that. And then one night, we were over there and he gave another talk, which is called The Guru Enters Devotee. And he said in that talk that the only realization that occurs is when the Guru's consciousness actually invades the devotee. And that is the process. There's no other process. It's not about you seeking. It's not about you having some experience. It's a matter of the condition of the Guru penetrating into your being, physically, emotionally, the whole thing. And he gave that communication. And then he went off into his office and he invited some ladies to come into the office with him. And one of those was my wife. And I was in the meditation hall and my navel started really hurting and my emotional being started freaking out. And I could feel that I was losing the cult of my relationship. I felt it in my navel. I felt like I was basically, having to let go of, when he would say that, you have to give up everything for God. There is no realization unless God becomes the senior principle of your life and the Guru becomes the senior principle and you really let go of everything. And I felt like that's what was happening. I could feel it in my navel and I was pretty out of whack emotionally because I could feel it psychically. And then after a short period of time, he invited everybody into the office and we all went into the office and the energy in the room was like, completely ecstatic, but I wasn't. And I saw that my wife she wasn't going anywhere. The story of Gopi and the Krishna and the gopis, where, they abandon their cattle and they just see Krishna and they forget about everything in their life except Krishna. Well, that had happened with my wife. I could see it in her eyes. All she could see was the Guru, and she was just completely in love with the state of the Guru and the condition of the Guru and the transmission of the Guru. And this was now late at night. It was probably 2:00 in the morning. And so I realized that she wasn't going home. We had a babysitter who was a high school student. And so I'm like, okay, I got to go home. So I went up to Adi Da and I said, I have to go home. I have to relieve our babysitter. And he called me forward. And so I went up to him and he reached out and he hugged me. And I disappeared. I lost all sense of body, consciousness, and awareness. And I went into this state of transcendental consciousness in which there was no limitation, there was no sense of self, there was no perspective. It was just it was like being in the void. And yet it was completely free and completely ecstatic.
This is just from a hug from Adida.
Just from a hug, just from a hug. And the interesting thing about that is when I was in that state of consciousness, the thing that I recognized and realized was that the self, capital S, the divine condition, the condition, our ultimate condition, the condition of the guru, is completely mad. It's not a part of this world. It has transcended this earth, and it's transcended the world. It's transcended everything. There's nothing, it can't be encapsulated. It's beyond form. And so there's a madness about it when you think of everything that we're doing that's about controlling life and experience. And yet the realization is beyond all of that. And so I just recognized that this madness, the self is mad. And then after a time, because there was no time, I came back into bodily awareness, and I started laughing hysterically. I mean, I laughed for 15 minutes solidly, rolling on the floor, because I realized that all my spiritual seeking, all of my effort, all my discipline was for naught. It didn't make any difference whatsoever. And so I mean, it was just maddening. And I'd look up at him and I'd say things like, "You madman," and I'd start laughing. And, I've used some of the terms in the epilogue of the Neo Listening, where you're a madman, you're what are some of those other terms? A libertine, a fool, on and on. And I just saw all that. It just, his freedom, his free state of consciousness really made sense to me. And I just felt liberated, completely liberated. So I was laughing and crying, and I was completely ecstatic. And then I remember at one point I said, "Now what are we going to do?" And he said, "We're going to just eat owl sandwiches until we disappear." So it was just, so that was a huge, breakthrough moment, obviously.
What were you feeling is the difference between your spiritual seeking and that state that was revealed to you?
How about night and day? In other words, it was like I was this encapsulated ego trying to find God, take heaven by storm. I was very serious about it. I was trying to be, as disciplined as I possibly could be and do everything right. And it was, it was like, it wasn't making any difference. Literally, it was making zero difference. It was only him transmitting his state that actually broke me open. I think it's important to also realize that I was in a condition of extreme vulnerability when I went in there. And I had the whole history of my, search and serious approach to practice and life. And he just blew it apart. Now, the other interesting thing about it is that was the beginning, actually, of the period that was later referred to as garbage and the goddess. And he would say, he would give us all these spiritual experiences and everything. It was just a maddening time. And then he'd say, it's just the goddess, just throw it away, put it in the garbage can, garbage and the goddess.
I want to ask a couple things about
Sure.
that. So in my sense, Adida works in two ways. One is revealing himself like he did in that hug to you, or showing his state, or that transmission. But there's also this other side where he was physically alive, working with you guys and teaching lessons and having all these considerations in relationship to you, because it seemed like just the transmission in of itself wasn't enough, because there's all this stuff that we have going on, right? And so I'm curious, one, what, this was still like 1973, right?
Right.
What was your feeling about who he was in those moments of him transmitting that state or revealing that to you? And what were those lessons? Maybe fast forward a little bit. That I know you've been a devotee for quite a long time. You probably had lots of these teaching moments with him. And I think that, when a lot of people hear about Adida for the first time, or hear that he was working in a very unconventional manner, they don't get beyond just the fact that he was working in an unconventional manner as if it were somehow due to his own just sick, twisted pleasure, like he's just like a charlatan, crazy guy, right? But
Right.
there's really not much conversation that I see, at least publicly, about how those considerations actually affected people, how it led to their growth.
Great.
So there's two, I guess what I want to know is how you grew as a being, one, through Adidas's direct transmission of himself, revealing the state of reality, and then two, those lessons and how that kind of progressed over time. And I know he was at this point, he was really starting to work in a spectacular kind of way with the garbage and the goddess. And for those who don't know, what was when you say goddess and throwing away garbage, in your own kind of understanding and words about it, what do you understand about that?
Well, the goddess, he uses the term goddess to represent spiritual experiences a lot. It's like you're receiving all these gifts from the goddess, so to speak. These transcendental moments you're getting. We had all these kind of awakenings and breakthroughs and visions and body changes and all this kind of stuff. And he would say, well, that's the goddess. The goddess is giving you all this stuff. And he said, it's garbage. You got to throw it all away. It doesn't mean that you negate it, but you don't hold on to anything. You just let go. It's like it has no ultimate significance, and it's just an experience. And so that what's interesting about, if I go back to that moment, what transpired after that incident in his office, which is like a samadhi, it's like a nirvikalpa samadhi. And then for, I don't know, it might have been the whole period, whatever that length of that period was, Garbage and the Goddess, was about a year. The thing that really shifted for me was that any time a dilemma would arise in me, any time that I would get concerned about something, any time there was fear, doubt, any kind of negative emotion or anything, I could kind of penetrate it. The force of that, the gift of that, state, that moment of realization and awakening, had the impact of allowing me to look at any other moment that normally I would have spiraled into concern, problem, doubt, unhappiness. I could penetrate it just by recognizing it. I just go, oh, that isn't necessary. That's just something arising. And so there was a kind of a freedom in the midst of that whole period where anything that would arise in awareness and life was somehow just kind of didn't have the force that it would normally have. It wouldn't cripple you. It wouldn't affect you negatively. So that was a big deal, and then at the end of that time, because he would initiate these circumstances, these processes, and then he'd bring it to an end, and then when you bring it to an end, he'd go, okay, that period, and it was all spontaneous, it was all very spontaneous. It was just occurring. And he would basically say, okay, that moment's over. Now we're back into the discipline period. Now you're going to have to find me spiritually without me being, in front of you day after day after day. You're going to have to find me in meditation. You're going to have to find the truth. And so it was, the thing that was valuable about that was when that period shifted, and then we got back into another period, which was similar to the previous period, where there was a lot of discipline and serious practice and meditation and all that. I had a totally different perspective. It wasn't like doing those things were going to lead me to realization, because I already saw the futility of that. They were just an appropriate action in that particular moment. And so and that stayed with me, ever since. I never feel that the disciplines in themselves are sufficient. It's an appropriate life to live, but it's not going to lead you to realization. It's just a way of keeping the body balanced and, healthy and responsive and vulnerable and sensitive. It's a secondary aspect. It's not primary, but for me, initially, it seemed primary. It was all about seeking and perfecting, the disciplines. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I'm also curious, what were you experiencing during those garbage in the goddess times? We've seen pictures and videos of people, kind of in hysterics and in wailing, and it to the, someone's not familiar with it, it looks crazy. What was actually going on in your experience, and were you like, how are you relating to this consciously, of this being just like giving you these wild experiences?
Well, there was a film made called A Difficult Man, and the Difficult Man, it was actually filmed in July of 1974 at the Mountain of Attention Sanctuary here in California, and it was like a 24-hour shot, and we stayed up all night and we were partying with him, and there was a wedding. He married a couple of people. And then there was a moment in that film where we were sitting in meditation with him in one of the temples, and the force came roaring into me. And there's a little bit you can kind of see in the film where I'm going, and I'm screaming and my arms are going up. And I mean, it's like, you just feel this, it's like putting your hands in an electric socket, and being electrocuted. That's kind of how it felt. And so it's this just tremendous force coming into your being and purifying all the emotional, not all of them, but a lot of emotional and physical knots. And so you're having kriyas, what they're called kriyas. And I used to have a lot of kriyas, I had a lot of dramatic kriyas because I had a lot of knots. So, you just recognize that he was transmitting this force and this energy. And, at times it was occurring, you'd go like, oh my God, what's going on? And, it's like, it's kind of challenging and difficult, but at the same time, it's like, it's so alive, it's so interesting. It's like, wow, how is this happening? And so I can just go back to that time. And as devotees back then, we used to say, it's like a week here is like at least a year or two prior to coming into, his company. In other words, there was so much going on so many levels, that it was just this dramatic, purification process. And then it would shift. And, and it was always a matter. So what he was always doing in the midst of all this is he was revealing all these stuff within yourself. It was all coming to the surface so you could see it and release it and know that none of it was truth. None of it was God, even though you having these great visions or whatever it was, in the next moment they disappear. And, it was garbage in the goddess, you just throw it away. You don't resist it, but you don't hold on to it. And so that was, it was always about freedom. It was always about find that free space where you're, completely rightly aligned to his condition and ultimately, your condition, and finding that freedom despite everything else that's going on. And so there was always these challenges where every experience you'd want to make it into something greater than it actually was. And then, it would just disappear. And that's what he was always doing.
And was there any
truth, leading you to truth?
Was there any kind of sense in those early days when people were perhaps younger, more idealistic, and people like really trying to get enlightened?
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yours truly, that was it. I mean, when I found Adi Da, or he found me, and I became a devotee, I said, he's got 5 years to enlighten me. That's it, 5 years, because I got a lot to do. And so it was very idealistic and also, very naive, thinking that realization is something that can happen, relatively quickly, and not understanding the depth of, our own karmas and resistance and our commitments to being a separate self and all the multitude of layers that represents. So idealism, absolutely 100%.
And Adi Da talks, as you know, about the difference between the talking school and the practicing school, the difference between philosophy versus the actual course of spiritual practice or sadhana. And we know, because we're human beings, that the biggest impediments to that are in the emotional sexual dimension of life. And that's where Adi Da, throughout his time teaching, would always be submitting, even though he said he's going to stop doing it, it was always more to do. And the vast majority of that seemed to be around the emotional sexual dimension. And that's where there's a lot of controversy comes up, right? Because we're so bound up and have so many ideas and complexes about sexuality. But I want to know, in your experience, Adi Da talks about emotion and sexuality being the same thing before we can talk about any examples in your experience. What is your understanding of that that teaching of Adi Da, that emotion and sexuality are the same? And he doesn't use emotion separately than sexuality. They're one and the same.
Right. And absolutely, have understood that to be the case. And sexuality without love and full emotional expression is really empty, and he had to spend so much time, early on in that arena, because nobody wants to really get into that area, or very few people really wanted to get into it. A lot of people are interested in sexual exploitation, and he also said, in the past, he says the key to understanding and realization is, sex. It's like you really have to understand that whole dimension of your being. That doesn't mean everybody has to be sexually active. You can be a celibate, but the emotional sexual being has to really be understood, because it's the clamp on the heart. It's like it's constricted there. It's only when you can freely express love. I mean, really, really express love, that you can really express sexuality, I mean, freely. And that's one of the things that Adida, represented, is he really was a tantric master. He really understood it, and he educated us in it, and we failed miserably, but it's like to be in front of somebody who is totally not bound by all the emotional complications that all of us, have in our upbringing and the culture and everything else, was absolutely liberating. And, you just to feel his force, and so sexuality it's a hidden thing. And so people either suppress it or they indulge it, but until it's brought into conformity as an expression of real love, and how does that happen? That can't happen, outside of a really committed relationship. I mean, one where you really, are vulnerable with each other, and you really trust one another and support one another in all ways, and feel one another on a continuous basis. You're not shutting down, when you can, then your sexual expression becomes one of ecstasy. Ecstasy, what does ecstasy mean? It means transcending self. It's not about acquiring, something for yourself. It's just free loving, free giving, and it's mindless. And so, Adida used to say too, he says, no pleasureless son of a bitch ever realized God. It's like the body has to be full of life. How can the body be full of life? The whole being, the whole mind has to be bathed in light. How can that happen if you're shut down emotionally, if you're shut down sexually, if you're afraid, if you're protecting yourself? It can't happen. So, he did it for, worked on us for years. And, he said nobody really got it, I mean, he's always way ahead of us, but at the same time, it was, it's very revelatory. And I go back, now, and I read some of the old literature that we have, and, it's profound, it's profound. And it's of great benefit, should be of great benefit for the human race, because this is where we're stuck. And Adida even said, he said, the world isn't suffering because we don't have enlightened beings. He said, the world is suffering, and it's a terrible mess, because people haven't awakened to the heart, and he's really talking about what he refers to as the fourth stage of life. It's not ultimate realization, but it's like, it's a letting your heart awaken, in love, and in relation to all beings, all things, acceptance, of everything, non-reactivity, not holding on to anything, but loving, that's what we're suffering from. The world's not in that disposition. The world is in that disposition, it'd be a totally different world. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And are there any occasions or incidents in your life with Adida that helped you come into contact with the heart and break down your particular patterns of withholding or knots around the emotional sexual?
about 1 million.
Okay. You can start with 1,000.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, obviously, just really, he's like a mirror, you know, and so he reflects to you, you know, your disposition. And so it would happen, you know, in multiple occasions. Could be just a minor little thing, but it's like you would see, oh, this is me contracting, this is me withdrawing, this is me, you know, being unloving, this is me being an asshole. You know, I don't know if I can say that on this, but anyway, it's
You
all
can.
all these reflections, you know, you get to see all that unconsciousness that is just patterns, you know, it's just the past. It's how we've adapted. We've grown up in a world without wisdom, you know, and it's reinforced as acceptable, all these things that are unloving and not free. And so, yeah, it was constant, you know, really constant. And the only way to move beyond it is you have to get into a senior position relative to it. That's the bottom line. If you can get into that senior position, in other words, if you can kind of tap into the condition, the radiant transcendental consciousness, however capable you are of doing that, we all have our abilities and inabilities to do that, then that stuff can be purified. You know, there's a higher principle that you bring into your existence, so that when you're seeing these things, when they're being reflected to you in any circumstance, and you can see them and observe them and not react to them and not suppress them, then, you know, you can they can be purified. But yeah, it was constant. Initially, it had to be very graphic and dramatic, you know, because it was like, you know, you're holding on so tenaciously, you know, to your crap, that it's like, you know, it takes like a sledgehammer to, you know, get you to kind of wake up even a little bit. And then, you know, over time, it's much more subtle. You know, you can just kind of be more aware.
Well, maybe from a million, maybe we can narrow it down to one sledgehammer moment and one subtle moment, and how you related to that. If you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, well, you know, there's, oh God, I don't know if I should be putting this on tape. But I mean, I'll just tell you one incident that it just popped into my mind about, you know, just a lesson, you know, that I had to learn. This was actually very early on, but so now I was a single person now. So I'm, you know, looking for love in all the wrong places. I was looking for love, you know. And so there was a devotee there that I became fascinated with. And I was just really attracted to her, you know, physically attracted to her. And so I was pursuing her, and I was, you know, kind of buying her gifts, and, you know, we were spending some time together and this and that. And, you know, we weren't really doing anything sexually, but I was, you know, I was on my way to conquering, you know, this relationship. And I remember one day we went out for a drive, and here in Lake County. And I remember that I think it was, we were by a stream or something. And I thought, okay, this is the moment. This is the moment. And I told her, I said, I love you. And she just started laughing at me. She said, you don't even know what love is. How absurd, you know? And it was like, I mean, I was devastated, you know, I was really devastated. And I remember after that going into the meditation hall and just crying. I mean,
Oh
from the
no.
depths of my being, it was just this oh, I can't be loved. It's like nobody loves me. It's like all this pain, and it was like, it was just this retching, and so that was just one of those moments where, I was just being purified, and so anyway, I don't know, that's just
Yeah,
my mind.
I totally relate to that. And how did you gain the capacity to stand prior to that feeling of being dependent on love or not being loved, and actually feeling that you are love or can
Well,
be strong independent?
that was probably the darkest night of it, so to speak. And it was interesting because I went through this purgation, this purging. And after I went through that, and I was in the meditation hall, and I was just trying to surrender everything, just let go, whatever's going to come up, let it come up, And by the end of it, it's like, I don't know, there was something released in me about that kind of neediness, and, this kind of desperate, need to be loved. And, so there something about that was purified. So then, I could be more in the play and dance of, relationships. And shortly after that, I ended up getting with a woman that, I really loved. And, we had a great relationship. It's the interesting thing about all this is that you're caught up in the relationship with the adept, with the master. And so it's all kind of a spontaneous occurrence. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know how it's going to unfold. And that's still with me to this day. It's like, I mean, every day, all day, if I can, I'm just throwing everything away, just letting go of everything that's, self, and, surrendering into that greater reality as much as I can, and trusting that whatever I need is going to be given. And so whatever's happening today, whatever experience is arising, this is my moment. Am I going to contract? Am I going to withdraw? Or am I going to basically accept everything and release everything, accept and release everything, and not hold on to any experience, and just trust that everything is going to be given that's appropriate. And so, I mean, you go through these crises, and what I find so amazing and wonderful is that when I go through a real deep crisis now, I recognize the value of it. I recognize what's behind it. I recognize what I'm being drawn into. I recognize what I'm releasing, what part of the past and habits are being purified so that, a greater, recognition and revelation can be given. And that's the way I want to live my life, and, so every day, I see patterns, and I see ideas, and I see philosophies, and I see, things that I want to hold on to that represent the past that are not in my best interest. And this could just be emotional, could be thought forms, could be things that have kind of represented my life, in the past.
How are you able to release those things in the context of your relationship with Adida?
Oh, very well. Basically, I meditate, every day, and I study every day, and I listen, almost every day to his teaching. I listen to him, and then I journal every day about, what my understanding is of, the true condition. And so all of those things reinforce it. And then I'm also in good company, being in good company reinforces that. And being with a loving, very loving, intimate, who is, not reactive and has purified, an enormous amount of, her own, garbage, so that it's a supportive circumstance to constantly be open in your feeling. And so, yeah, so basically, yeah, it's, and I'm, like I said, I'm one of the things that I'm having just a, really enjoying is, in addition to reading, his primary source texts, I go back and I reread, his earlier works. And I just see that he was always communicating the same thing. It was always the same, just a little bit different, but if you go deep enough, you see, oh yeah, this is what he's saying.
Oh, absolutely. It's all the
Yeah,
same.
you know that, yeah.
Feeling and transmission. And when you are turning your attention, your feeling to Adida, what does that feel like to you?
Well, it feels ecstatic. Basically it feels, it's heart opening. There's no problem. Everything is not separate from the divine reality. There's no fear, there's no doubt. So it feels, yeah, ecstatic is the best word. It's like, you're not caught in yourself. The more I can get outside of myself, the more I'm in relationship to whatever's occurring and whatever's arising and the people that I'm with, the more I'm actually, turned away from myself and just enjoying, the process as it unfolds, seeing the dance, the divine dance, you could even call it, just spontaneously occurring. And I get in these moments where I go, uh-oh, and then I just go, oh, well, love that, surrender that, let go of that, don't judge that. So it's like experience becomes more fluid. That's kind of my experience, because I'm challenged every day about things that in the past would really, freak me out. And I have to just go, well, how important is that in the midst of infinity? And so, yeah, so it's, yeah, that's how I feel. I mean, I just feel, I'll tell you this, I've been a devotee for a long time. And, I was around Adida for many, many years and served him personally in a lot of ways. And, I had a lot of different functions. I had, the head priest of the Mountain of Attention, the ashram manager in Naitamba, retreat manager. I had a lot of different, I was a CSM of Marin, when it was 350 people. So, I've done a lot of different services, and I had I didn't have as much contact as some people with Adida, but I had a lot. And, I loved it, I absolutely loved it. I absolutely, it was just absolutely wonderful. But I can honestly say that since his passing, that I've found him more deeply and more consistently spiritually than I ever did when he was alive. I had more kind of, I guess you could call them dramatic experiences in his company. But I find the truth of who he is now more available than ever before. And I know a lot of people that haven't met him in the flesh, have the same, have a similar experience.
And what do you attribute that to?
Grace. Totally. Grace. And also, it's like, you can't discount your years of practice, your years of, being in his company and struggling and, being hit over the head with a 2x4 and all that. And you just learn from experience.
And did you have, when he was alive, and whether in formal occasions of darshan or meditation in his company, did you have experiences that kind of grew your recognition of who he was?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Many times, it'd be a darshan occasion and you'd go in and you'd sit down and, you come into the room and you're kind of your body mind, and then you're sitting there and then you connect with him and basically you become diffuse, and you just see his condition. You just see him and you just see him radiating his condition. And, you leave and it's like you feel transformed. I mean, that happened consistently. I wanted to tell you one incident. Because
Absolutely.
I don't know what our time's like, but I wanted to at least get this in there.
Of course.
Because when Adi Da passed, devotees were invited to his samadhi site for about 2 years. And we'd go up there and we'd sit up there. And it was just so powerful and so potent. And after 2 years, Pandit Sukhapur said that there wasn't going to be access except on very rare occasions for, certain individuals. And so the new temple was going to be at the gates to the brightness, the gates to the Mahasamadhi site. And they were going to build a temple there. And that was where the occasions were going to be. And so after Bhagavan Mahasamadhi, I made a vow that I was going to go to Naitamba every year. And so after the second year, so we had access to the brightness for 3 years. The time of the Mahasamadhi, the year after the Mahasamadhi, and then the second year after the Mahasamadhi. And then the third year, there was not going to be any access, just to the brightness gates. And I remember going on retreat then, and I was thinking, well, I've been up at the brightness gates and I've been to the Mahasamadhi site at the brightness, and they're not the same. It's like, so I'm a little bit emotionally grumpy inside, that we're not going back up there. And so anyway, we get off the boat, all the retreatants, and we hear that it's the anniversary, which I didn't realize at the time, the anniversary of his empowerment of the brightness gates. So everybody in the ashram is invited up there for an occasion, for a puja. And I was taking a shower or something, and I got off the boat and felt kind of dirty. So I was taking a shower and I walked out to get on the bus that was going to go up there, and it had already left. So everybody else was up there, and I said, well, okay, I'm going to have to walk up there, which is about I don't know, what is it, 15-minute walk, 10-minute, 15-minute walk. So I walked up there, and of course, everybody's seated. And I'm the last person up there. I'm the very end. And so I'm, this is going on in my mind, I'm not up at the brightness. And so I have my gift, and I offer my gift, to the murti. And I put a flower down, and I sit back up, and I look at the murti, and light starts coming out of Bhagavan's eyes in the murti. I mean, literal light. It comes right into my eyes, and then boom, I lose all body consciousness. And my body in its most diffuse form is transported to the brightness. And I'm up there at the brightness, and I'm seeing the brightness. I'm seeing the temple. I can see the trees. I can see the ocean. I can see Vanabalabu, I think, in the distance. I mean, I'm up there at the brightness.
Wow.
And then I come into, I come back into kind of body awareness. And when I arrived there, Nadi Kanta was just starting to do the puja. And I come into my body awareness, and she comes over, and just as I'm coming into the body, she's giving me a piece of prasad. So I missed the entire puja. But that was a very, very, interesting moment for me, because it transcends time and space, that relationship. And there was that Murti was completely alive in that moment. It was him transmitting his state to me and showing me that there was no difference. And so I just wanted to mention that, because, my experience of Bhagavan not being in the body has not been a lessening of his influence and his transmission. It's been an increase of it. It's a dramatic increase of it. And so anyway, I wanted to get that in there before we end.
Yeah, I'm amazed by that story. And also, I love hearing you say that. So I've been a devotee for so long. I never saw Adida when he was physically alive, and I feel no limitation in my relationship with him besides what I impose.
Right,
But, of course, I wish I was around. Who wouldn't? But I feel nothing lacking. And even just a photograph of Adida is Murti is not an ordinary photograph. It's
right,
so alive, and it's
right,
so much transmission, and you can, obviously it's a replacement for him, it's an access point, but it's so alive, and the transmission is so palpable, and able to access the sheer magnitude of who Adida is and what everything is, including us, through that extraordinary means. And it definitely does feel like this, what a sacrifice Adida's life was to be able to create this agency for all time.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary, Leela, his life. I mean, truly, truly, truly extraordinary. And yet he said, many times that he would pass, out of here when, the time was right. And when he felt like his offering could continue. I don't know if this is appropriate, but I came across this, one of his poems.
Yeah, of course.
We got connected here today, and this out of Crazy Dhamma, Sing Inclined to His Weaker Side. And this is a favorite of all devotees, and I'm sure you've heard it many times, but I love this one. It says, "I've grown used to miracles. The wonder is not whether we will be together, me with those I'm loving on some other side. The wonder is that we met and have been together, loving here in this half-made world where love is yet to take its hold. Of course, this is no consolation to you who are seeking for me everywhere, but this is not the place for consolations, and only those who understand are fit for loving here. I was used to miracles the day I lived, and now I begin my days myself. Even if I make a logic of your sentiment, if we found ourselves here, how should we lose the touch in a world more light?" And that's kind of my experience. It's like, I feel like I'm living in a world more light, and it's just because I feel like his transmission has always been eternally present. and we can tap into it in any time that we're, not playing the egoic game. And it's there for the benefit of everybody that will, make a response to him and use him as a resort. And it's very mysterious. I think it's very important to understand how mysterious the process is, and not think that it's all encapsulated in a specific formula, because it doesn't work. There are no formulas for realizing God. It doesn't work that way. Every individual has a unique relationship, with a divine being, and they have their own karmas, and they work in all kinds of mysterious ways. And everybody, if you pay attention, you realize that you get everything that you need, for your own growth and benefit.
Absolutely. That's incredibly well said. Yeah. Thank you, Dennis. Thanks for sharing that poem. Yeah, it's really, really gorgeous.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that we got to connect, and I'm so grateful for you being so open and vulnerable in your communication, and for sharing. I know you could probably talk for hours, and I hope you write a book.
Yeah, I know. Well, I know a lot of people have said, when are you going to write your book? When are you going to tell your stories? And maybe this will be the impetus to do it.